in DDT, and it was all really good. And then other super safe things came along, like neonics, which a few years later, they were supposed to be very targeted. A few years later, found out that actually they're not as safe as we thought they were. The next generation of insecticides, to replace the neonics, are sulfoxamines. They're just starting to be registered in Europe. I think sulfoxaflor, the first one, is registered in Ireland, and they're just coming through. I think they'll be in the UK next year. They're supposed to be safe. They've already discovered they're not as safe to bees as people think they are. And then going further along again, the next generation of insecticides, the RNA interferers, which are supposed to be super, super safe. They're very, very targeted. They interfere with RNA, DNA sequences, and they just kill the insect they're targeting. They've just registered the first ones in America. They're a few years away in the EU. But there's evidence already coming out of America that the chances are that they will act on beneficials, bees in particular, breeding cycles on bees. So basically, it's all a bit Groundhog Day. And if you look at the history of these insecticides and how they're brought in, used, withdrawn, it does bring to mind that famous definition of insanity to me, that insanity is repeating the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result, which is where we seem to have been with insecticides. Another reason for an interest in biological pest control, basically we've only got one insecticide left in the UK, synthetic pyrethroid, which everything's pretty well resistant to anyway through overuse. We spoke in the previous session about overuse of insecticides. Synthetic pyrethroids are so cheap. I think it's pretty fair to say, now I'm not tarring every conventional farmer with this brush, but I think it's fair to say I've been in the industry long enough that over the last few decades, that basically the farming and agronomist mentality is you're going through a crop with a few things in your spray tank. Pyrethroids are so cheap, you might as well throw them in anyway. So IPM, until recently, it's getting better now, but I don't think IPM has been working. And as Marek said in the last session, synthetic pyrethroids have basically just been chucked around the environment willy-nilly, and even more so now neonics have gone. So another reason for my interest in biological pest control, but the real biggie, the real big driver was when I bought a beehive about 10 years ago. Suddenly it became personal, up close and personal. I go out there with an insecticide, it's harming my bees, my honey, and suddenly my mindset changed. So I had a light bulb moment the other day. This is going a little bit off piece, but I just wanted to throw that out there. I had a light bulb moment. How about building into cross-compliance? Every subsidy-claiming farmer needs to own a beehive. And if I just put the stats in front of you, over the last 100 years, the number of beehives has dropped 75%. And at the moment, I think there's about 275,000 beehives and about 44,000 beekeepers. There's about 85,000 farmers claim subsidy. So overnight, you've got 85,000 more beehives, which is a 35% increase in beehives. And you've got 85,000 more beekeepers, which is a 100% increase. And I can almost guarantee there'll be a reduction in insecticide and a greater interest in biological pest control once it gets personal for all the other farmers that have suddenly got beehives. I mean, I think it's way too simple for politicians, and there's no way anything like this would ever be introduced, but I just wanted to throw it out there because I thought it was a fantastic, simple idea that would get really good results. Right, back on Pest. Biological pest control. So, obviously in a horticultural environment, people actually throw beneficial insects out onto their crops to do good. That doesn't really work on a broadacre scale at the moment. It'd be way too expensive, wouldn't really work. So there's only two things you can do really. As Charlotte was saying, you've got best IPM principles, making sure you only spray when you need to. There's fantastic decision support tools out there now, the AHDB, BYDV tool. So that's the first thing. And the only other thing you can really do on a broadacre scale is basically just provide habitats for the beneficials. So that's what we're trying to do with Richard and the Assist project. That's one of my nice little strips. I'll come back to the deer later. That's a margin on the side. That's another view of a strip. I'm not quite sure why I put that in there, but there's some more deer in it. But one of the points I wanted to make was that it's all very well and good put in these habitats for beneficials, but we need to manage them. Really, really important to manage them. If we're not careful, it's like we're enticing the beneficials into the sweetie shop, and then we're killing them with insecticides and spray drift and collateral damage. So I think it's very important not just to put habitats out there and ignore them. We've got to manage them really intensively, and this has been shown with neonics. A lot of work to show how widely out into the environment neonics got, and actually it was almost, some of the flower strips at times were almost causing more problems because you were sucking insects in, but there was neonics were in the flower strips. So we need to make sure that we don't put sprays into these habitats. So we've got a nice little curtain we've made on the end of our sprayer so we can make sure that our pesticides don't go into the strips. Likewise with fertilisers. So we're really trying to actively manage them. An interesting side shoot was a bit of biological pest control of a larger mammalian nature. We get a lot of deer damage in our crops, a hell of a lot of deer damage. We found with the assist strips that the deer are always in the grass strips, not in the crop. And in this assist field, it was amazingly noticeable. There was virtually no flattened crop. And the deer were always running up and down, lying in, grazing in the strips. Even when the crop was harvested and there was a stubble, the deer were still walking up and down the strips. So that was a bit of a side effect. Still biological control, but of a much larger species. That's what it looks like on the ground. This is the sites that Richard showed. There's an interesting thing that the infield strips is something that needs clearing up with DEFRA, I think, unless anybody can correct me. When I was putting in my subsidy claim this year, I found that the infield strips were a bit, it was a bit confusing as to what they were from an EFA point of view, and it was very difficult. I found it very difficult to claim them as an environmental focus area, so I left them out of my claim. It's very easy for strips around the edge of fields, but DEFRA need to really make these infield strips claimable. It's just a little practical point that needs feeding back to DEFRA, really, that they're claimable for environmental favoured areas. Final point, just a bit of an unashamed advert for Agroforestry, which is my other little pet subject. I think that these infield strips have got legs, and I can't wait to put them through all my fields. And I think the next obvious stage is any strips that are in fields north-south to put trees in them as well, build the diversity even more. So we've got the flower-rich margins. Obviously, they can work in an east-west direction, but in a north-south where you haven't got shading problems with trees, to build the strips even more, make them more biodiverse. Thank you.